How y'all doing? I'm the Watchman, and this is part 12. Part 12 of the Sanctuary, the outlawed and hidden truths that the devil doesn't want you to know about God's sanctuary. Alright, now in the past videos, we've been going over the order, showing how God's pattern and order of the sanctuary is throughout the whole Bible, even in his patriarchs, even in how he aligned his patriarchs up. But it's critical that I wanted to show the order and the pattern of the sanctuary before we get to Daniel 8, in which we're about to get to right now. But one thing I want to say before we get into it, as we talk about Daniel 8, we have to keep in mind that the devil, he wanted to, from the beginning, he wanted to defile and bring down God's sanctuary because he wanted God's throne. God's throne is in his sanctuary. Is in his sanctuary. So what the devil could not do physically, he used a religious power to do it spiritually. To do it spiritually. And that is what Daniel 8 is all about. Now, this religious power is the Roman Catholic Church. So I want to start off by saying I am not, when I'm addressing the Roman Catholic Church, I'm not addressing the people. I'm addressing the system and what it did and what it stands for, not the people. Because Jesus said, I have sheep in many folds. And there are many good-hearted Christians who just don't know the truth. Who just don't know the truth. And it is up to us, brothers like you and I, brothers and sisters like you and I, to reveal and show them the truth. To reveal and show them the truth. Again, I'm not talking about the people, just the system. Just the system, you know. But in this right here is one of the main reasons why the devil does not want the sanctuary to be taught. To be taught. Because as we've been seeing, there's so much meat in God's sanctuary. But let's get right to it. Turning your Bibles with me to Daniel 8. Let's go to Daniel 8, and we're going to start at verse 9. Daniel 8, and we're going to start at verse 9. Now, the little horn that's spoken here is the Roman Catholic Church. Is the Roman Catholic Church. So let's get right to it. Daniel 8, verse 9. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground, and it stamped on them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And a host was giving him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and it prospered. And I like how God refers in verse 12 as the sanctuary. Now he referred to it as the truth. It says in verse 12, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and it prospered. Verse 13, then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And for those who don't know, in dealing with Bible prophecy, God uses the day for year analogy. So when it says 2,300 days, it's really 2,300 years. And you might say, well, Josh, where does it start? Where does the actual 2,300 days start? Let's go to the next chapter in Daniel 9, and we're going to read verse 25. Daniel 9 verse 25 reads, now therefore, and understand. Now this is Gabriel talking to Daniel, and you can see that from verse 21, Daniel 9 verse 21. But we're in 25. In verse 25 it says, now therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, the wall, even in troublous times. Now, it starts when the going forth, when the decree is made to rebuild Jerusalem, that's when it starts. And this chapter actually is also talking about the 70-week prophecy, which is inside the 2300-year prophecy. The 70-week prophecy is the prophecy foretelling the coming of the Messiah. The coming of the Messiah. See, the Jews had no excuse to not know when Jesus was going to be born. They had no excuse at all. But that's what the 70-week was touching on, and that's inside of the 2300-day prophecy. But the decree, Artaxerxes set forth the decree to rebuild Jerusalem in 456 AD. I mean BC. 456 BC. So it started in 456 BC was the decree made to rebuild Jerusalem. And that's when the 2300-year prophecy started. That's when the 2300-year prophecy started. But back to Daniel 8. And as we see that this little horn power, this religious power, it says, verse 12, and a host was giving him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground. And verse 11, like at the end, it says, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Now that we've been going over the order, and we've been going over the order, and what the pieces mean, and how the pieces are supposed to be in our character and who we are, now we can see clearly how this little horn power brought down the sanctuary. Let's go over this. I don't mean now that we can see clearly, but now you'll be able to understand why the devil's intent was on casting down the sanctuary, on why his intent was steady on casting down the sanctuary. And how did the Roman Catholic Church cast down the sanctuary? Or how do they do it to this day? Let's check it out. The first thing they do is what's called the Eucharist, y'all. And I'm going to stress this before we get, please, if you have a pencil, paper, pen, write down certain names so you can go back and you can investigate for yourself and you can look up what you need to look up and Google the times and the dates that I'm about to give y'all so y'all can see without a shadow of a doubt God's truth. Never separate history and the word, for history complements the Bible in every angle. History, true history now, not fabricated history. But anyway, please, like I always say, the truth loves investigation. The truth loves investigation. Now, the first way they cast it down is through the Eucharist. The Eucharist, I believe what they call Mass. The Eucharist is where they crucify Christ every day afresh. They crucify him anew every day. Now that contradicts Jesus's one-time sacrifice for our soul. Jesus only had to die once. There's no need to crucify him every day, every day, every day. And that's what the Eucharist does. It crucifies Jesus every day. And that takes away what piece of furniture? The altar of sacrifice, which represents the one-time sacrifice of the lamb being slain for all of our sins. For all of our sins. And I stress that. Jesus only had to die one time. Once. Now what's the second way? Is baptism. How do they take down baptism? It's through sprinkling. They'll just walk through and sprinkle however they do, but they believe in sprinkling instead of immersion. Now, this takes away the truth that in order to be saved, because they'll just walk through sprinkling. Now, this takes away the truth that in order to be saved by God, a person must make a conscious decision. A conscious decision. And not only does it take away the truth that the person must make a conscious decision, but it also takes away the fact that this is what immersion does. When a person is baptized by immersion and he's laid into the water, his old self, the water represents the grave, his old self goes into the grave and the new man arises up out of the water. That is why baptism by immersion is so important, because the old self goes into the water, which represents the grave, the watery grave, and the old self dies, and the new man, which is now a child of God, comes up to walk upon the earth. And that is why immersion is so important. But with sprinkling, it totally takes away the being made new. You know, it totally takes, there is no death of the old man with baptism by sprinkling. With baptism by sprinkling. That is the way they take away the the laver of brass. Now, the table of showbread, they take away the table of showbread, which we know is the Bible. They take that away by, they outlawed the Bible. When the Roman Catholic Church was in power for, I believe it was during that 2300-year period, when they were in power, you died if you had a Bible. You were killed, and even more than that, all the Bibles were in Latin. So just in case you got your hands on it, it was in a language you could not read. The common people could not read Latin back then, and still to this day, they do not stress or believe in their members reading the Bible. And if you are a Catholic watching this, how much Bible study did you really have? Or was your church services just filled with rituals? Think about it. But even to this day, they do not stress and want their members to read the word. Now, and next is the altar of sacrifice, which represents prayer, communion, and our communication with God, our connection. They say you can't come to God. This is how they take away the altar of incense. They say you can't come to God by yourself. You have to pray through a priest, a bishop, Mary, and the saints. You have to pray through one of them. You just can't get on your knees and pray to God by yourself. And another point I want to bring out real quick is that you know how God's sanctuary has these curtains. And in the midst of this curtain, in the midst of this tent that's inside of the courtyard, see, this is the courtyard, and this is a tent made of thick curtains with a veil separating it. These are two rooms. This is a two-room compartment. Now, how do they copy this? A two-room compartment with a veil separating? It's the rule in their sanctuary. You walk in any Catholic cathedral, they have a two-room compartment sitting in the middle of their sanctuary with a veil separating it. And that's called confessional booth. They have confession booths. The confession booths almost is just like, this is the holy place and this is the most holy place. And they have this two-room compartment sitting inside their sanctuaries, almost as God has his. And not only that, as Daniel chapter 7 verse 24 and 25, when also talking about the little horn in a little more detail, it says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, talking about this religious power. Now this confessional booth is one way that it speaks great words against God. For this, it actually says that a man, you have these bishops and these priests saying that they can forgive sins. They're sitting in a sanctuary saying, God, we can do what you do. You're not the only one who can forgive sins. We can forgive them too. And we all know that's almost ludicrous. But this is what they say. This is what they say in almost every Catholic church around the world. When anytime anyone goes to a confessional booth and asks for forgiveness, and that priest or bishop says, son, thy sins be forgiven thee. They're telling God, we can do what you do. We can do what you do. Now, as for the 7-branch candlestick, which we know represents witnessing and character. Now, how did they do away with being a witness for God? You know, going out and witnessing for God. How did they do away with that? Was you either believe what they believe or you die. There was no witnessing. There was no being a witness and following someone's lead and be like, you know what, they're a great guy. I want what's inside of them. You know, they gotta have God in them. No, it wasn't none of that. It was you either believe what we believe or you die. And let me really explain this to y'all, because I actually had someone say, I don't believe all this. You know that the Catholic Church killed all those people. Over 50 million Christians, 50 million were killed, tortured, burned at the stake by the Spanish Inquisition, by the Catholic Church. You know, thousands upon thousands were killed in France in one day. In one day. You know, all the Christians were killed in one day, and they burned the Bibles in the streets. This is history, y'all. This is history. That same day that France did that, they took a prostitute off the street and made her their God. They said, this is going to be our God. They call her, they gave her the title, the Goddess of Reason. And just to throw in real quick, where do you think our Statue of Liberty comes from? It was a gift from France, and they have the only other one. Only France and the United States. You think she stands for liberty? She represents the goddess of reason, and is always a memorial of the day that they burned thousands upon thousands of Christians in one day throughout the streets of France, and burned the Bibles and things in the street. Do your homework. Don't just take my word for it. Don't just take my word for it. Over 50 million Christians lost their lives. And Pope John, I always bring this up to people who say, no, he apologized. The last pope right here before Benedict, Pope John, he made an apology to the Christian world for the actions of the Catholic Church during this time. So for those who say it didn't happen, what was he apologizing for? And you can Google the apology. I have. Now, so that took away the 7-branch candlestick, which stood for witnessing, was that you either believe what they believe or you were killed. There was no witnessing. Now, what's the last piece? It's the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant. And they tried to take away the Shekinah glory, which we know sits in between the two cherubims on the mercy seat, because it's God's glory sitting on his throne. And how did they take this away? They take this away by the Pope. By the Pope. First off, they call the Pope the Holy Father, which God said, call no man Father but me. But they distinctly call him the Holy Father. And then he is the only religious entity that sits in the sanctuary on a throne. We've all seen it. You can Google it. The Pope sits in church on a gold throne, gold and whatever materials they made it out of, but he sits in God's house on a throne. The only throne in this sanctuary setup is the one right here, sitting over top of the ark, is the mercy seat, which is God's throne. But he has the Pope sitting in God's house on a throne. And how did they try to cast down the ark? How did they cast down the ark, which contains the law? Well, and type this in the Catholic Catechism. And you can go in the Catholic Catechism for this one. And you can just Google this one also. But they completely did away with the second commandment. And they changed the fourth commandment. Now, why did they do away with the second commandment? What's the second commandment? Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven images. They pray, they bow down, they rub, they kiss statues and images of saints, rose beads, prayer beads and all these things. That is why they completely did away with the second one. Look, go to Catholic Catechism and look at their 10 commandments and hold up God's 10 commandments next to it. Wow. Watch the difference. They completely took the second one out and they changed the fourth. Yes, they changed the Sabbath commandment, which is the longest commandment out of all 10. And did God know that they'll try to change his commandment? Not only in Daniel chapter 7 verse 25 does the word say, and they shall attempt to change my times and laws, but the first word of the Sabbath commandment is remember. The only reason God would tell us to remember something is if he knew someone would try to change it. Isn't that the only reason why you would tell somebody to remember something? Unless you knew that somebody else was going to come along and try to change it, or you didn't want that person to forget it. Now, the Sabbath, the Lord said, remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. 6 days shall thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. And the commandment goes on because it's the longest out of all 10 commandments. He must have really wanted us to pay attention to it. And it's the only commandment that has God's full authority in it. It's the only commandment where God lets us know who created the heavens and the earth. It's the only one where he states his authority inside of the actual commandment. So they changed the fourth because when Constantine, and this change was made in Google this, y'all. It was made in 321 AD by Constantine. He brought up the edict. He used the Council of Laodicea to make this edict that to keep Sunday holy. And we know the commandment, people say, well, I worship God on every day. Yeah, you're supposed to. That's not the commandment. The commandment isn't to worship God on Sabbath, it's to keep it holy. And if I can't choose a day that I want to keep holy, I can't make no day holy. You know, and that's the same with the Catholic Church. You know, Constantine, they had so much hatred for the Jews back then that they said, okay, the Jews got Saturday as their Sabbath. And even though we're just now being converted into Christianity, because they were open pagan worshipers, they said, even though the Jews got Saturday, we're going to keep our day of worship, which is Sunday, because they worship Nimrod and Tammuz. They worship the sun. And Tammuz and Nimrod were representations of the sun. And so they worship the sun on Sunday. And some people, you even have people say, nah, you can't worship on Saturday. That make you a Saturnalian, or you're in Saturnalia worship. Look, Saturnalia was the Saxon name given to the day, the seventh day. It was the Saxon name given to the seventh day, you know. But that the number itself of what day it is, I don't care if it was called Porch Day. I'd be worshiping on Porch Day. Why would I worship on Porch Day? Because it's the seventh day of the week. God didn't give a name. He said on the seventh day. The Sunday has always been the first day of the week since the beginning of time. And Saturday has always been the seventh day of the week since the beginning of time. I don't care less what the name is. I'm more worried about the number. It's number seven. Number seven. So the fourth commandment is the other law that they try to change. And also just Googling Catholic Church changes Sabbath to Sunday. Watch everything that pop up. And they brag about it. They brag about it. Check it. It's in the Catholic Catechism. Even somebody asked them a question one time. Somebody said, who gave y'all the authority? And this is in the Catechism. Somebody said, who gave y'all the authority to change God's Ten Commandment law? You know what they said? They said, because the Protestants follow it. That's where our authority comes from. They said our authority comes from people following it. So right now, you're seeing that two different styles of worship have been set up through time. The way God says worship, and the way the devil, through his religious entity, says worship. Through his religious entity says worship. And right before I show you how God cleanses the throne, I'm going to show you how the devil, where God says that the devil is the one behind this beast, behind this religious power, real fast. And that can be found in Revelation 13. Go to Revelation 13, and we're going to read verse 4. Revelation 13 verse 4 says, and they worshiped the dragon which gave power unto the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like unto this beast? Who is able to make war with him? Let me say that again. And they worshiped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. And we know beast means kingdom when we're talking about the religious kingdom of the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so that is how piece by piece the Roman Catholic Church cast down God's heavenly sanctuary. Cast down the sanctuary. Now remember, he said after 2,300 years, the sanctuary will be cleansed, meaning it will be restored back to its fullness. How did God do that? He used his patriarchs, as he did with Abel, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph, and Moses. Let's see what patriarchs he used to restore it back to its rightful self, to restore each piece. Write these names down. If you don't know of these men, please write them down and read about their lives and what they did. For these were great patriarchs of the word. We would not be sitting here discussing this right now if God didn't use these gentlemen. In the 1300s, God used John Wycliffe. John Wycliffe was the first one to translate the Bible into English so the common man could read it. He was the first one to translate the Bible into English so the common man could read it. What the peace that he restored? He restored the table of showbread. The table of showbread. In the 1400s, you had Martin Luther, who started the Lutherans. He built it upon the theme Bible and Bible only. And he brought back the truth of justification by faith. Justification by faith. Because back then, people used to go through all these crazy things to be forgiven. You know, walk up steps for 5 hours on their knees and whip themselves with cords and chains. They still do it to this day. Now, he brought back justification by faith, which is saying all you have to do is to believe upon the one-time sacrifice of Jesus and that his blood is covers your sins. All you have to do is believe upon the one-time sacrifice of Christ, and his blood will cover your sins. What peace did he bring back? The altar of sacrifice. The altar of sacrifice. Then we have in the 1500s, John Calvin. John Calvin started the Presbyterians, the Presbyterian church. And his theme he built it on was prayer. Prayer. The Presbyterians brought back prayer, which we know is the altar of incense, the altar of incense. And then we had in the 1600s, John Smith. And do you see how each one took a piece from the other, built on it, then introduced another thing, took that, what was shown to them before, built on it, then introduced another thing, and just kept building and building. We have in the 1600s, John Smith, who was the founder of the Baptists. And their name says it all. They restored baptism by immersion. Baptism by immersion. Then you had in the 1700s, John Wesley and his brother, the Wesley brothers, who founded the Methodist Church. And they believed in evangelism. They brought back witnessing, being witnesses to the world, was brought back Methodist by the Methodists. By the Methodists. So they in turn brought back and restored the seven-branch candlestick. The seven-branch candlestick. Then in the 1800s, you have William Miller. Now, William Miller didn't bring back a peace, but what he did do was he started a movement without TV, internet, radio, but he started a movement of bringing people's knowledge, eyes back to the scriptures and back to prophecy. And he actually thought he had the answer to the 2300 year prophecy. For he thought when it said the sanctuary to be cleansed, now think about this, because of his lack of study on the sanctuary or lack of knowledge on the sanctuary, he misinterpreted this prophecy. And he thought when it said the sanctuary to be cleansed, that it was Jesus coming back in the clouds. Now I'm going to do a series on the actual sanctuary process with the high priest, because what he didn't realize, that it was actually when the high priest would take the sins into the most holy place, and then that's where judgment took place. And that's what really happens at the end of the 2300. But when it says the sanctuary will be cleansed, that's when judgment begins. But so in 1844, and that's the date of the end of the 2300 period, is they thought that Christ was coming again. I'm talking about thousands of people all around the world, and this was called in history as the Great Disappointment. But out of this movement, in the very year that the sanctuary is to be cleansed, because remember, there's one more piece that need to be restored, and that's the Ark of the Covenant. And out of the Millerite movement came three people: Joseph Bates, Ellen G. White, and James White. Now, Ellen G. White brought back the theme, and they built it upon God's law. What's in the Ark of the Covenant? God's law. They brought back the theme of worshiping God on the seventh day and restoring the second commandment. And just so y'all didn't know, because you say, how can the Catholic Church take out the second commandment completely and it still be 10? They split the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet. They split that in half and made 2 commandments out of it. But anyway, Ellen G. White, Joseph Bates, and James White builded upon the theme of God's Ten Commandment law. Of God's Ten Commandment law. And that is how the sanctuary was cleansed. And Ellen White, and I stress this to y'all, that to study and read for yourself. And that's why we went over the patterns, to show the patterns and how God does his works, and his great works, which they are. Because a lot of people, you gets a lot Ellen White gets a lot of hatred and down talk nowadays. Of course, this is the devil's the prince of this world. This is his world, and he doesn't want you to know the truth. And he doesn't want you to know the truth, and he's gonna keep you away from it any and every chance he gets. Any and every chance he gets. But she only had a third grade education. A third grade education. And she wrote almost more books than anybody in history. In history. And one of her books, Steps to Christ, is the most translated book in languages, in every language. It's the most translated book in different languages in history. In history. And all she did was, she gets so much hatred and so much opposition. And guess what all they build upon? Is to keep God's commandments. Which in John 14:15, Jesus says, if ye love me, you'll keep my commandments. Each step, y'all, each step is so important. And you see how God used different patriarchs. He just didn't use one religion to bring back, restore sanctuary. He used almost every religion and who founded them, from Presbyterians to Methodists to Baptists. But each one was a vital piece in restoring the sanctuary. But you see how you had to keep growing. You had to, okay, accept what came before, then build upon it. Accept what came before and build upon it. And the last one that came in 1844 at the end of the 2300 year prophecy was Ellen G. White, James White, and Joseph Bates, who was the co-founder with Ellen. And a lot of people say, you'll get this once you start reading on Ellen, and even here on YouTube, you hear a lot of people say, oh, they follow that prophet Ellen White, those Seventh-day Adventists, they follow her. Y'all, the Watchman, Joshua Wiley, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. And think about it, if you've been studying with me on my videos, you have never heard me refer to Ellen White during my studies. I only believe in the Bible and the Bible only. Before we were called Seventh-day Adventists, they were called the people of the book. The people of the book. And then God said, then it was told to be called Seventh-day Adventists, because the thing was to bring back to God's law, to restore the last piece of furniture that need to be restored, that fulfilled Daniel 8 when it said after 2,300 years, his sanctuary will be cleansed and restored. But y'all have never heard me refer to her. Y'all have never heard me use none of her writings. It's nothing but the Bible, because that is all we believe in, is the Bible and the Bible only. The Bible only. And like any, like Kenneth Copeland can write a book and don't nobody say nothing about it. Or this person can write a book. Warren, what's his name? Rick Warren can write a book, Purpose Driven, and people read it and don't nobody say nothing about it. But if you tell somebody to read a book by Ellen, they're like, you know, there's only 3 books that I've ever read by Ellen G. White, even though she's written more books than anybody in history, because it's hard to take me away from this, me personally. But The Great Controversy, and that's a book talking about where she goes in where the history of Christianity from where the Bible left off. It shows, I'm talking about how Christians used to have to live in tunnels under the earth, how they used to bury children, women and children alive when it was outlawed to be, when you could not be a Christian under Roman persecution, how in Scotland they used to bury women and children alive. And the women and children would get in the coffin singing hymns. It's that history of what happened to the Christians during Roman persecution. And it also tells the history of the Jesuits and Illuminati. It's a great book. The Great Controversy, the Steps to Christ, which name speaks for itself. Like I said, it's the most translated book in history, the most reprinted book in history. And you have The Desire of Ages, which is about Jesus' life. I'm actually reading that now, and I tell anybody, these are must reads, and I'm picky. It's hard to drive me from this. That's how come. Think about it. She's written almost more books than any author in history, and I've only read 3 books of hers. Why? Because it's hard to take me from this. And that's what she says how it's supposed to be. And that's how it's supposed to be. But I say study and pray. Don't take my word, investigate. If what I've said has you doubting, it's all right to doubt. But if you doubt enough to go and investigate and honestly search the scriptures, then I've done my job, because the truth loves investigation, because God doesn't hide from the truth. And the Holy Spirit will lead you to all truth. If you wonder why certain churches who worship on the first day of the week, does it feel like there's something missing? Or have you ever asked yourself, what if the seventh day is the Sabbath, does God say anything about people worshiping? Because remember, Sunday was used for sun worship. God in Ezekiel chapter 8, I believe it's from verses 12 through 16, God speaks about sun worship in his sanctuary. And let me tell y'all, he is not happy with it at all. He does not like people worshiping the sun Sunday in his sanctuary. And I'm the watchman. He tells me to tell y'all I have to. And I do it out of love, because I love you. And if it takes you hating me, disliking me, which some people do, just for me sharing with you what God reveals to me, then so be it. Just hopefully that it plants a seed to maybe one day you'll go and really study for yourself. Search the scriptures. Google it. Google these things. The devil knows the best place to hide is in plain sight. These things are right there for you to Google and look up yourself. Look it up yourself. The Catholic Church has 4 periodicals that they made into a book at the end of the 18th century called Rome's Challenge, where they challenge the Protestant churches to find where God condones worship on Sunday, because they said that any Protestants who worship on the day they set up to worship is considered the Catholic Church's daughters. Yes, they consider that any denomination, any religion that worships on Sunday, the Catholic Church considers you her daughters. Her daughters. They said, if they say in that book, Rome's Challenge, which I have a video of on my page, that if you worship, if you say you go by the Bible and the Bible only, you'll worship on Saturday. And that's from the Catholic Church's mouth themselves. Google the book, Rome's Challenge. Do not take my word for it. Study, y'all. Thanks for taking this time out to study with me. May God bless. May God bless. And the next part, before I go, the next part will be about how you can, and this will be the last part on the sanctuary, but how the sanctuary can be used to reveal false doctrine. How the sanctuary and the order and the process can be used to reveal false doctrine. Y'all have a blessed day.